Ever since the DS launched all the way back in 2005, it introduced a whole new way to play games, with many thanks to its dual screens. Developers came up with plenty of cool ideas throughout the handheld's lifespan. One of these games, The World Ends With You, which was released all the way back in 2008, really showed off what you could do with two screens. And it also helped that it was a damn good game too. Where years have gone by since the game first came out, and the series has had a bit of a resurgence thanks to the cast appearing in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance that appeared on both 3DS and PS4, as well as a mobile port of the original game. Now 10 years after the original first release, we're now getting yet another re-release of this game, but this time for the Nintendo's newest console, the Nintendo Switch. Dubbed the final remix version, this aims to be the ultimate version with new content and a remixed soundtrack. Let's see how they did, shall we? First off, let's talk about one of the game's strongest points, its story and setting. The game follows Neku, a moody teenager that really hasn't had much time for people and prefers his own company. However, one day he wakes up in the middle of Shibuya with no recollection of how he got there. He meets up with a teenage girl, where they're attacked by some strange creatures called the Noise. It's then he's told that he's been entered into some sort of competition called the Reaper's Game, which sees competitors completing specific tasks each day that push each character to the limits or face the risk of erasure. The setting and plot is so fascinating, and it is really helped by the strong supporting cast. Each character has plenty of depth to them, and their own personal struggles are tied into this Reaper Games. The narrative can shock you, and it can be rather quite thrilling at times. There is certainly some virtue last reward vibes here, and that's no bad thing at all. The game's combat is very fun, fast and unique. It's certainly a blast to play, while it was on the DS. The combat is played in real time and sees you using pins that grant attacks that can deal some big damage to the enemies called the Noise. Without these pins, Neku is incredibly vulnerable as you cannot attack. Add in your companion, which can be controlled on the DS touchscreen, the combat sections were fantastic. That was on the DS. On the Switch, the combat has been changed dramatically. The combat has been tweaked and retooled to work on Nintendo's hybrid console, a console that only has one screen, and as the game was intended to work with two screens, many things have changed. Companions are essentially pins now and can't be controlled individually. Instead, it's just Neku on one screen using his pin abilities against enemies. Pin mechanics is a fantastic addition to the game that allows you to experiment and pick your favourite setup. There's hundreds of pins to choose from, many of them with unique ways of attacking. Each of these pins can also be upgraded and improved upon, which is nice. But when using these pins, this is where the game goes to pop. Controls for this game when docked are absolutely awful at times. See, Square in their infinite wisdom decide to make this game control like a Wii game, meaning you have to play the game with one Joy-Con and spend most of the time pointing at the TV screen with the Joy-Con and using motion controls for attacks. Motion controls can work really well if done well, but unfortunately they really feel like they're just tacked on. You point at the TV to move your reticle where you want Neku to move, and to do an attack on an enemy, you point at the enemy and press the attack button, but some pins will need you to do some motion movements. It also doesn't help that the game is really fast paced and the motion controls sometimes don't recognise your movements. It really does take me back to the bad Wii days. It would have been nice if they could have tried and incorporate some button controls in this game and focus less on these darn motion controls. Dock play may be very frustrating at times, but thankfully when playing in handheld mode it's a much better experience, mainly due to the fact it ditches these blasted motion controls and instead uses the Switch's touchscreen controls, and with that it feels very much like the DS game and the mobile port. Handheld controls see you touching the screen to move Neku around, tapping and swiping to do different attacks. It's so much more precise and ultimately the best way to play. Back to the mechanics of the combat now, and the pins and the clubs you use and wear have considerable effects to the combat. See, Shibuya is a stylish place and different areas of the map have different popular brands. If you so have one of these popular brands, then you'll be treated to buffs and increased attack damage. But in reverse, there are also unpopular brands, and if you have one of these treads or pins in your collection, then you'll have half damage and the battle will overall not be in your favour. The game has its own fair share of quality and life improvements to make for a much better experience. There's also a few new inclusions, such as a nice new inclusion of the ability to play the whole game with a friend. Just give them the other Joy-Con and they can join in on the fun. The game also has a 3 to 5 hour extra chapter that is a decent extension to the game that is exclusive to this version only. Presentation-wise, the game should be applauded for its brilliant art style, which is incredibly stylish and reminds me a bit of the Persona franchise. And thanks to the HD upgrade, the game really pops out on the Switch in both handheld and dock mode, as it delivers some delightful looking vistas. Tying in with the wonderful art style is the absolutely wonderful soundtrack, which is honestly one of the best original soundtracks I've ever heard. It's a glorious mix of upbeat tempo J-pop, rock and R&B that really does pack a punch and sounds superb when bouncing out your TV speakers. The game regularly introduces new tracks and you'll be constantly stopping what you're doing just to listen to the awesome tracks on offer. At the end of the day, one big question remains. Is this the ultimate version of The World Ends With You? Now, this is a hard one. The game is easily the best looking and most content-rich version of the game to date. Its quality of life improvements also go some way to make this the best playing version, but it's also them motion controls when playing in dock mode that can be a real off-putter. Also the fact that this is a £40 port of a 10-year-old game, which may be a bit too expensive for some fans. There's no denying that The World Ends With You is a fantastic game that has really stood the test of time, with a really interesting and gripping story that will keep you engaged long throughout the game's runtime, and the RPG and combat mechanics are really clever and innovative. Playing in handheld mode, you really do appreciate the combat more. If this is your first time playing the game, then you're in for a treat, and whilst the DS version may still be the best version due to them controls, this final remix port is a flawed masterpiece that may not be the best version, but it is a fitting end to what could be the end of the franchise. Overall, I'm giving The World Ends With You Final Remix an 8.5 out of 10 with the title of great. Thank you for watching my review, like, rate and subscribe, and until next time, happy gaming, bye!